Hello and welcome to the JB&M Sports Fanatic channel. Thank you for joining me for this video. And yeah, we're going to go ahead and chime in on this situation concerning Julio Jones and whether or not, the Falcons are going to end up trading him. But particularly for this, does he want to be traded? And that answer, thanks to Shannon Sharp, we know, yeah, when asked if he's staying with the Falcons, he said he's out of there. Now, obviously, it's going to be up to the Falcons to trade him, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But from his perspective, he wants to be out. He requested a few months ago, apparently, that he wanted to leave Atlanta, be traded elsewhere. Don't know where particularly he has in mind. I've seen a couple different reports. I've seen that there is interest in him playing with Cam Newton. And so you just never know. I mean, the Patriots, they did have an internal discussion about Julio Jones, but it's a smart thing to do, especially for teams that need a receiver and have the money to acquire him. So definitely it makes sense to have those conversations, and the Patriots certainly can use his services. But that being aside the point, though, let's take a minute to look at the Atlanta Falcons currently and where they're at the receiver position and what their offense would look like without Julio Jones being there. So it all starts obviously with Matt Ryan. We all know leading up to the draft, there was speculation whether or not the Falcons would be interested in perhaps taking someone like a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance if he were to fall to them, or even a Mac Jones. And so ultimately, they chose the best player on the board, in many people's opinion, by taking Kyle Pitts, adding another tight end, and drastically improving the tight end position for the Atlanta Falcons. And should Julio Jones leave, they're going to have to rely heavily upon the likes of Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst from the tight end position. And not to mention, obviously, their top receiver will become Calvin Ridley. He had a fantastic year last year, and so he would have to improve upon that even more. He'd get even more targets, as obviously he really capitalized a lot, especially when Julio was hurt. Russell Cage, now that would definitely be a name that you would really have to pay attention for, especially if you're someone that plays fantasy football. In the time that Julio was out, I feel like he came in and did some good things throughout the time that Julio being gone. But to have to rely on him consistently, we'll have to see how that looks. But the Falcons' offense, they would still be good, thanks particularly to the addition of Kyle Pitts. But whenever you lose someone like Julio, oh man, I mean, Julio's a deep threat. He's basically everything that you want in a receiver, physical. I mean, sure, he gets injured quite a bit, but he has been a fantastic player. And so the Atlanta Falcons offense certainly would miss him. The Falcons, I imagine they'd want to keep him, but obviously, the situation with the money, that's just, that's a whole scenario right there. So just to go ahead and piggyback off of the success that Julio Jones has had since he came into the league. Obviously, he was a first round pick, six overall, out of the University of Alabama. And so, I mean, now we know that Alabama, they basically produce receivers, pretty much multiple first round picks each year. But this is going back, to the earlier stage of that period of them sending receivers pro once Atlanta started really passing the ball more. I guess you can say he contributed to the birth of Bama passing it a lot more, because they used to be just purely mostly running the ball. But that being said, though, Julio Jones, definitely a freak athlete, 6'3", 220 pounds. And so, I mean, even coming out of college, he had an injury that he was dealing with when he ran his 40 coming out of college, but he still managed to run a 4.39 coming out of college with his injury. Now, yes, it's been some time, but he is still extremely fast. That is certainly for sure. Now, he's been in the league going back to 2011. He's played his entire career with the Atlanta Falcons. And throughout that time, he has started 134 games and has had 848 receptions for 12,896 yards, averaging 15.2 yards a catch. That is some yards there. You're averaging a first down and a half per catch, along with 60 receiving touchdowns. So, yeah, definitely very, very skilled, can really stretch a defense, can beat a corner. If you're a corner, you're going to want to back up off of him. But, I mean, you probably already know that this is Julio Jones we're talking about. But certainly, corners, they don't want to get too close to him because he's going to run by you. I mean, definitely just one of the scariest threats in the game when it comes to the deep ball, especially when he's healthy. Definitely one of the best receivers in the game still. His best season came back in 2015, and that year he had 136 receptions, 1,871 yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. So definitely a fantastic. He's had multiple Pro Bowl seasons going back to 2012, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. And so last year he only started 9 games, so he wasn't able to, make the Pro Bowl there. But obviously there was a lot going on that season, anyways, with COVID and everything. But he still managed to rack up 51 receptions for 771 yards and an average of 15.1 yards per catch and 3 touchdowns last season, in that shortened season for him. So yeah, definitely a tremendous talent. Even going back to his collegiate days, I mean, we're just going to go all Julio Jones out right now. When you go back to and look at him from when he was playing college from 2018 to 2010, throughout that time, he had 179 receptions for 2,653 yards and averaged nearly 15 yards a catch and had 15 receiving touchdowns. So, yeah, Julio Jones has been a playmaker his entire career, whether we're talking at the collegiate level, professional level. This guy can come in and be a receiver one on any team and drastically improve their passing game. So I mean, the Falcons, they don't want to let him go, but that's the situation right now. And so some of the well, I guess you could say the biggest factor in any Julio Jones trade, if it were to take place, is the 15.3 million guaranteed salary this year. The Falcons right now, they're not in a very good salary cap space right now. I believe they're one of the three worst situations right now, along with next season as well. It's just not looking good for the Falcons. Matter of fact, they are struggling perhaps to have enough salary to sign their rookies. We'll touch on that in a second. I believe I have the article for that as well. But just to focus on this, I mean, he's definitely going to acquire a lot of money. Now the Patriots, as I mentioned earlier, that makes sense. They've got 16.4 million, and so they'd be able to swallow that guaranteed money this year. The Colts also make sense. I mean, I know they brought T.Y. Hilton back. I feel like they have a bunch of receivers, but they still don't have that. Or at least, I mean, Ty is that number one. But if you can improve with a Julio Jones, if they get that chance, I best believe they would take it for sure. And then the Chargers, imagine Justin Herbert if he had Julio Jones as well, in addition to what he already has. It's not a need, but it would definitely really make the Chargers, a team that you'd have to think twice about in terms of just how deep they can go. So definitely understand that. And so in this one right here, um, so yeah, and this just confirms that he did essentially, request a trade a little while back. And so clearly Julio, I mean, he's been there for a while. Sometimes you feel like you just need a fresh start. Obviously, it had to be a major blow when they made it to the Super Bowl and was unable to finish, and the Patriots ended up beating the Falcons in that Super Bowl. And so stuff like that is hard to get over, especially once you start seeing that your team start losing more and more as the years go by. And then last season, dealing with the injury, the team not being successful, and then, just looking at the team on paper this year, nobody's thinking that the Falcons are going to, make a Super Bowl run. And so there's just a lot. And so he's at the point where if he's going to compete for a championship again, he feels he needs to go elsewhere to do it. And so definitely understand that. Now, the Falcons, in terms of the trade, they prefer not to trade Julio Jones in the NFC. And so, but they would do so for the right price. So ultimately for the Falcons, it comes down to the right price for Julio Jones. They want to get the value for him, and we'll discuss that in a second in terms of what that value would look like. But they certainly don't want to just give him away just because. I mean, one, he's a tremendous talent, but two, they want to make sure they get something in return, even if it's just a future investment. And so definitely makes sense there. Perhaps focusing on draft picks, although it probably would have made sense to trade him before the draft, if not for the fact that it would still count against him in terms of the cap if he were to be traded before the first of next month. So that's why they have not pulled the trigger yet. But they certainly would be preferably trading him away to the AFC if possible. So we'll see if that means, good news perhaps for the Patriots, maybe the Colts. We'll see what that looks like. Maybe a team like the Jets, they may have some interest. Jaguars, they wanted a receiver so badly, they drafted a running back and tried to make him a receiver. So we'll see how that works out there. And in terms of what that value looks like, so according to this article here, the trade rumors is that the Falcons are asking teams for they were asking teams for a first round pick prior to the 2021 draft. And so I'm sure they would have some interest in a first rounder for next year's draft. We'll have to see if teams, want to do that. I mean, obviously from a pure talent standpoint, Julio is certainly worth the first round pick. That is not the question. But there are some extra factors that you need to take into consideration when it comes to teams that might potentially be reaching out for Julio Jones. According to Sportskeeda, they're saying that the injury that Julio Jones was dealing with last year with his hamstring, there's an 83% chance of that injury returning next season. And so that's just the odds that apparently there is. And so that's a very high percentage chance. So basically, any team that's acquiring him, you're going to have to come to the realization that he may not be available for the entire season. Matter of fact, he may end up missing perhaps half the season or something like that. There's always that possibility. Julio Jones is no strangers to injuries whatsoever. And so at 32 years old, that's something to really consider. And then at some point, Father Time's going to catch up with Julio. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen this year, nor do I think it's going to happen next year. But, once he starts reaching, past that, once he reaches really about 34, 35, there is that chance of that significant drop off, starting to happen. And so, or maybe, these injuries start to become recurring regularly, and then you end up with a situation like AJ Green. And so you definitely don't want to give up your first round pick if that's going to turn out to be a scenario, because you want to trade for the value that you're going to receive, not necessarily what he's done in the past. And so that's another thing to consider. And then obviously his contract is still going to be tough to deal with. I mean, even if you're a team that does have the money, that's still going to be a good chunk of the cap that you're going to have to deal with. I mean, the Falcons, they've tried to speak with him and get him to restructure, his contract. Doesn't seem Julio's that interested in that. They've obviously had guys like Matt Ryan already restructured his contract, and the Falcons are still not in a good situation cap-wise. So certainly it's going to be whoever takes them, they're going to have to take that into consideration that, yeah, this is going to have to just be a contract that you're going to have to eat up during that time and hope for the best. So there does come with some risk for trading for Julio. With that being said, though, for many teams, this is a risk that you have to take. I feel you have to pull the trigger. Julio Jones, he is that guy. He's that dude. He is certainly that guy that can take the top off the defense. So especially if you're a team that's struggling at receivers, I mean, yeah, Julio Jones is definitely a game changer, and so he could be that top receiver that helps take your team over the top. So, but with that being said, though, thank you so much for joining me for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and as always, as more news continues to drop, you can be sure to find it here, especially if Julio does end up getting traded about a week from now, then you'll definitely find that here. But thank you again for watching, and see you guys next time.